To Canaan's land I'm on my way, where the soul of man never dies. My darkest night will turn to day, where the soul of man never dies. Dear friends, there'll be no sad farewells, there'll be no tear-dimmed eyes, where all is peace and joy and love, and the soul of man never dies. A rose is blooming there for me, where the soul of man never dies, and I will spend eternity where the soul of man never dies. Dear friends, there'll be no sad farewells, there'll be no tear-dimmed eyes, where all is peace and joy and love, and the soul of man never dies. A love light beams across the foam, where the soul of man never dies. It shines to light the shores of home, where the soul of man never dies. Dear friends, there'll be no sad farewells, there'll be no tear-dimmed eyes, where all is peace and joy and love, and the soul of man never dies. My life will end in deathless sleep, where the soul of man never dies, and everlasting joys I'll reap, where the soul of man never dies. Dear friends, there'll be no sad farewells, there'll be no tear-dimmed eyes, where all is peace and joy and love, and the soul of man never dies. I'm on my way to that fair land, where the soul of man never dies, where there will be no parting hand, where the soul of man never dies. Dear friends, there'll be no sad farewells, there'll be no tear-dimmed eyes, where all is peace and joy and love, and the soul of man never dies.
As we look at this lesson tonight, we do so. This probably is not the most popular occurrence of Jesus raising someone from the dead. We see a lot in the book of John, chapter 11, when we discuss there, closer to Jesus' crucifixion, the raising of Lazarus from the dead, and we see that Jesus knew ahead of time what was going on, and he knew what he planned to do. And so it is that we're told here in verse 11, it came to pass soon afterwards that he went into a city called Nain, and his disciples went with him, and a great multitude. Now, when he drew near to the gate of the city, behold, there was carried out one that was dead, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and much people of the city was with her. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her, and said unto her, Weep not. And he came nigh and touched the bier, and the bears stood still. And he said, Young man, I say unto thee, arise. And he that was dead sat up and began to speak. And they glorified God, saying, A great prophet is risen among us, and God hath visited his people. And this report went forth concerning him in the whole of Judea and all the region round about. Now, as we know, nothing happens that Jesus is not aware of, but one of the greatest miracles that he could perform is the one that he performs here with the raising of the widow's son. And as I said, when we compare this to the account of Lazarus, Lazarus was sick, and Jesus knew that, and he also knew that he was going to die, and he also knew that he was going to raise him from the dead. And so Jesus comes to this city with his disciples and those who are following him. And seeing that Jesus usually doesn't do anything just haphazardly, we should probably understand that he was aware of the situation and the circumstance of this widow and her son. Now, there were many people who were sick in Jesus' day, and there were many who died in Jesus' day, and Jesus did not raise all of them from the dead. But there is a little bit of insight in these passages that help us perhaps to understand why, out of all of those who were sick and dying, Jesus may have chosen this particular city at this particular time to go and interact in this situation. In the book of 1 Corinthians, just for a minute, 15th chapter, I kind of want to look at that as we're looking at this raising of the widow's son. In 1 Corinthians 15, verse 26, the Apostle Paul says, "The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. Jesus, through his sacrifice on the cross of Calvary, overcame one enemy, which was sin, that had kept us in a lifetime of bondage, that we now could receive fully the forgiveness of sins." And so as we continue in looking at some of the verses here, Paul tells us in verse 50 and following, "Now this I say, brethren, that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, neither doth corruption inherit incorruption. Behold, I show you a mystery, we shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump, the trump shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality." And then in verse 58, "Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, forsomuch as you know your labor is not in vain in the Lord." And so when we talk about raising the widow's son from the dead, just like Lazarus, who Jesus raised from the dead, it is appropriate to say that they have been raised from the dead rather than resurrected, because that's a different situation. The resurrection is one where this mortal has exchanged this mortal body for an immortal body, or this corruptible body for an incorruptible. Lazarus only was brought back from the dead to his physical body. And likewise, the widow's son, as we're going to see, was brought back in his physical body. How do we know that? Because the scriptures also say that Jesus is the first begotten from the dead. Well, that can't be exactly correct if these people really resurrected, because the widow's son came back, Lazarus came back, so then Jesus couldn't possibly be the first begotten from the dead because others had came back. But as we look at these verses, we understand that Jesus is the first begotten from the dead to die no more. That is, to exchange the corruptible body for the incorruptible. And so Jesus chooses to go down to Nain, as we see here, and his disciples with him, and as we see, a great multitude. Now, Jesus has done many miracles. He has healed the sick, and he has cast out demons, and he's done many wonderful works that people have seen and know of. And so here he is going into this city, and all of these people are following behind him. His disciples and close associates, no doubt, are together with him in this close little group. But then there are multitudes of others who are following Jesus, perhaps because they desire something of him, or perhaps they just want to hear more of the teachings that Jesus has been giving, the teaching. They were astonished. And so we're told in verse 12, now when he drew near to the gate of the city, behold, there was carried out one that was dead, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and much people of the city was with her. Now, some people might just see this as Jesus casually came upon the scene, but I choose to think that Jesus knew what was happening. He knew the circumstances. He knew the situation. It was close enough to where he was that he could journey into the city. So we'd have to ask the question, you think it's a coincidence that he just so happens to show up when they're carrying the body out of the city for burial? I mean, it's just a coincidence that, this whole multitude of people are coming with him to Nain, and it's just a coincidence. Out of all the cities, out of all the places. So again, what we have here is an account from Luke, and we must think about Luke. Luke was a physician, and so Luke was quite interested, no doubt, in the miracles that Jesus did, healing the sick. With all of Luke's talent and all of his ability and all of his knowledge, there were things that he could do or might do, but there were things that Jesus did that went far beyond what his capabilities and his talents were, because he was working with the Holy Spirit. And so Jesus chooses this time, this place, to perform what you might think of as the greatest miracle, bringing someone back from the dead. And when someone is crippled and they're made to walk, we can say, well, they got their life back, but it's not exactly the same. It's not exactly the same when someone is paralyzed and they can now walk. They had life, it just wasn't the type of life that anybody would probably choose. And so when we say they got their life back, when Jesus healed them, when he cast out the devils, some might say, well, these people got their life back. Well, they did, but not to the same extent as this. And we all know that once someone has become deceased, that's pretty much the end of the road. And so with the Jewish people, when someone had passed away, generally in their customs, they took the body and washed it and prepared it for burial. And usually within 24 hours, the body was buried or put in the tomb or whatever their custom of the time was. And so we have a couple things here that helps us perhaps to understand why Jesus would have chosen this particular situation or circumstance. And we're told that this son was the only son of his mother. And we're also told that she was a widow. And of course, in that day and time, widows were generally dependent upon their families to take care of them. And generally it was the son's responsibility as the one who inherited his father's property to take care of his mother, to see that she was taken care of in her needs. So we have this situation where this woman has already lost a husband who had been dependent upon her son to some extent. Now, we don't know exactly how old he was, but nonetheless, in a way, he became her hope, short of, again, becoming someone who begs on the street or is submitted to the mercy of others. You know, we see this in India all the time, that when a woman loses her husband, a great portion of their income is gone. And many times they are not capable, at least in the rural and the more poor areas. I mean, if you got $1 million, you got $1 million, or if you got 10 million rubies or whatever, rubles. But you know, when you're talking about someone who, between the husband and the wife and a family, barely ekes out an existence, when someone passes away, especially the husband, it puts a great burden upon the family. And of course, the son would assume as much as possible the responsibility. But if you don't have a son or don't have children that are near, that are able to take care of you, then, you know, the only thing that is pretty much left is to beg. And so this woman was facing a very difficult situation. I mean, she was capable of working, but you know, again, we're all aware of the fact that the pay and work that generally a woman gets paid for is not going to make up, especially at this time, the work of her husband. And so this gives us some insight into why Jesus would choose to do this at this particular time. And Luke clearly gives us some insight by saying that he was the only son of his mother and that she was a widow. And so Jesus was a man of compassion. He is someone who could feel the pressures and burdens of life. If we understand it, you know, at this time we don't hear anything about Joseph. And so it has been the assumption of at least most biblical scholars that Joseph was probably several years older than Mary, and therefore he would have logically, just because of age and circumstances, passed away before she did. And so sometimes there was 15, 20 years difference or more in the age of a husband and his wife. And so in a way, Jesus kind of understands the circumstances here, being at least he was the elder son of Mary and Joseph. And of course, when his father passed away, Jesus had to shoulder responsibility. Not only was he the carpenter's son, but we have references that say, you know, he was the carpenter also. And so with his work, he had supported his mother, had that responsibility. It's interesting at the cross that Jesus was concerned about what was going to happen to his mother, how she would be treated, how she would be taken care of. And he gives her, in essence, into the care of John, a man who had likewise compassion. He seems to have shared in that concept or that idea of genuine love. And he writes a lot about that. And so Jesus could probably put himself in the situation of knowing what it was like when his father passed away and having to shoulder the responsibility for his siblings and his mother, and even after the siblings maybe had grown up some and maybe even moved away. That doesn't change the fact that he had an obligation, responsibility to his mother. And so, he could have empathy with the fact that this woman was in a very dark place. Again, mourning the husband, mourning the son, wondering what tomorrow is going to bring. At that time, there's no life insurance, there's no Social Security, there's not all of that, so people can't pat her on the shoulder and say it's going to be okay. We'll help you get the paperwork in, taken care of, and you're going to be all right. Not exactly the way it worked back then. And so, we see here that there were much people of the city which was going out with her. One of the things that the Jews are known for is that they were people who, again, had respect for one another and families when they had lost someone. And Jewish custom and tradition is that for 7 days after someone passes away, the Jewish community, the family, makes sure that someone is there with the family. Now, the custom today, which is an extension of that, is they cover the mirrors in the house so that you don't have to look and see, your face and how bad maybe that you look. So they cover up the mirrors and they sit with them and they listen and they talk. As Paul says, again in Romans 12, to rejoice with those that rejoice and weep with those that weep. And so for at least a week, the people were taken care of. Someone saw that they had food and that there was someone there that if they wanted to talk, could talk. And even as we see with Lazarus, when Mary got up to go out to see Jesus, those who were sitting there with her, keeping her company and mourning with her, thought that she was going to go back to the tomb, and so they were going to go with her. They intended to accompany her to the tomb. And so we see much people of the city was with her. And again, many of them no doubt had the same thought in mind. What is this poor woman going to do? And we can provide food for a while and we can help her for a while, but who's going to really take care of this woman? Who's going to see for the rest of her life that she has the things that she has need of? And so the people were probably thinking the same thing. They were mourning with her. Jesus sees this, and we're told, and when the Lord saw her, when you read about the burial customs and some of the things among the Jewish people, Today, most synagogues have a burial committee. Now, that's my term for it. They have their own way, but basically there is a group of individuals who in the synagogue act on behalf of the deceased. And so when a body is to be prepared for burial, they come to the house, they wash the body, they prepare the body for burial. Again, taking that responsibility away from the family. And it's seen as a great deed among the Jewish people that they assume that responsibility. Of course, Jesus was not preparing the body for burial or doing those things, but it's still interesting that he chose to touch that. Now, for most of us, when we read that, we just read it and go on, and we don't really think a lot about it. But again, it's something that he chose to do, and it falls into that compassion. He didn't have to touch the body in order to raise it from the dead, because we know from the resurrection of Lazarus, all he had to do was go to the tomb and call Lazarus come forth, and he came forth. So he didn't have to touch Lazarus to raise him from the dead, but this is something he chose to do. And you can probably, again, I'm just thinking about the customs and traditions, but it's one of those things that, did you see what he did? Did you see that? And it's being unclean ceremonially was one of the things that causes issues. On the holy days, if you happen, that's why they painted the sepulchres white, so that people didn't accidentally enter into one of those even in the dark, thinking it was just a cave. And if you were going to be involved in some celebration, whether it was Passover or Pentecost or whatever it was, if you became unclean, you weren't allowed to participate in that until you went through the cleansing, went through the period of waiting. And so, it's not necessarily scandalous, but it's one of those things that he touched that. Did you see what he did? And so Jesus does that and leaves that again to people to interpret in whatever way they want. But he said, "Young man, I say unto thee, arise." Now it's interesting, just like at the tomb, he said, "Lazarus, come forth." Jesus had told Martha, "I am the resurrection and the life." And he discussed, in the scriptures we see where Jesus has the power of the resurrection. And so he lays his hand on the stretcher and he speaks to the young man. He says, "Young man, come forth." And so here again, he limits the power of the resurrection solely to this individual, or to raise him from the dead. And so he specifically, rather than raising everybody from the dead that was all around, he had his hand on the stretcher and he specifically addresses the young man. And so we're told that he that was dead sat up and began to speak. Doesn't say what exactly happened to this young man in an accident, whether he was sick. And we all know that when we are sick and extremely sick, we tend to sleep a lot. We tend to come in and out of consciousness. And so again, this young man was in one place and then he was deceased, and of course his spirit would have left the body, and now it returns back to the body, leaving him to question if the events that had taken place between the time that he had died to this time was but a dream or what it was. And so he begins to speak. Not only does he have life restored, but he has health and strength to where he can speak. And we're told he gave him to his mother. Now, it's an interesting, I don't understand, the word gave there has a lot of different meanings to it. I don't know if, since his hands were already on the conveyance that the body was to be carried, if he scooped him up and handed him to his mother, in that sense of a word, he gave him to his mother, or if he just means that in bringing him back from the dead, he gave him back to his mother to take care of her and to provide for her and to take away the worry and the concern that was associated with that. And we're told in verse 16, and fear took hold on all. This is not something that they were used to seeing. It's not something that we see. And so this is a genuine miracle in the fullest sense of the word. And anybody who can raise the dead back to life is to be feared. Anyone who can just walk up to a stretcher carrying a body and say, "Young man, arise," and he raises up, what else can he do? We already know that some of his disciples have been with him through various events and circumstances, seen some of the miracles that he performs. And so there was a certain fear of Jesus and what he was doing. We're told the glorified God, saying, "A great prophet is risen among us, and God hath visited his people." Now, at this time, it doesn't, again, say that they're not announcing that he's the Christ or the Messiah. But in saying this, we know Elijah brought the widow's son back to life in the Old Testament. And so the vision of this to them are things that they had heard and read about in the prophets. And so a great prophet, in their mind, a great prophet had risen up amongst us, and God was in the process of visiting his people, of bringing to them something unique and something special. Still going to be a little bit of time before Jesus starts asking questions like, "Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" And some of them will say Elijah, some John the Baptist, Jeremiah, or one of the other prophets. And so it's this event that helps to bring about some of the concept or the idea that a great prophet at least had came among the people. And we're told that this report went forth concerning him in the whole of Judea and all the region round about. Jesus was in the area of Galilee. Nain is in the area of Galilee in the northern part. There is this great multitude of people that are following Jesus. And as we can see in his life, some of them were what I like to think of as spies sent to keep an eye on him from the religious leaders that were in Jerusalem. Go see what he's into. Keep an eye on him, talking to the rabbis and some of the synagogues about what he's teaching, what he's doing. They were concerned about Jesus and what he was doing and what he was trying to accomplish. And so when this happens, not only are the people of the city there to witness this, but this multitude of people are there. And so the people disperse. Just like anything else, when you have some real juicy gossip, you want to make sure you're the first person that tells it. You know, once everybody else knows it, it's not as fun anymore. If you can go from city to city, town to town, end to end, restaurant to restaurant, whatever it is, and you've got something new and exciting to tell, people get all excited about listening to that. And so this extends all the way from Galilee back down through Samaria into Judea. And so we get the idea that all those who dwelt in this, what we today think of as the Holy Land, came to know one way or the other. And so this one event helps to launch Jesus' reputation again among the people of the area, causes people to want to seek him out, and especially if they hear that he is somewhere near, to go and see him. And so this helps to publish Jesus roundabout.
In closing this evening, we wish to thank you again for spending your time in study with us. We hope the lesson has been uplifting and motivational. We encourage you to return again for our next lesson. Until then, may we invite you to visit our website. You will find many study opportunities. Our resource page has links to the Gospel Broadcasting Network, a 24/7 station with many great Christian programs and speakers. In Search of the Lord's Way, with Brother Phil Sanders. We have 2 links for Bibles and downloadable software. If you are looking to really expand your knowledge, perhaps you might like to try World Video Bible School, a college-level learning site free of charge. So, until next time, may God bless and keep you in His care as we walk together in His truth. And remember, as always, the churches of Christ salute you.